At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law contemptuously said, "You won't get any of his $40 million, you beggar." Her poisonous words shocked those present, and her diamonds sparkled as she waved me away. I stood silently, a grieving father in a worn suit. But when the lawyer read the will, her smugness disappeared. Justice was served, and the truth about my sacrifices struck everyone. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The cathedral was packed. 200 people, maybe more, all here for Roland. I stood beside his casket in my only black suit, the same one I'd worn to his wedding 6 months ago. The fabric felt tight across my shoulders, but it was clean, pressed, respectful. Father Michael's voice echoed through St. Mary's Cathedral. Roland Quinn was a visionary who believed technology could heal our planet. His environmental startup wasn't just a business. It was his mission to leave the world better than he found it. I watched the faces in the crowd. Roland's business partners from the financial district, college friends from Stanford, colleagues from the tech world who saw him as the next Steve Jobs. They all listened with genuine grief etched on their faces, all except Meera. My daughter-in-law sat 3 rows back, checking her Cartier watch. Again. The diamonds caught the light filtering through the stained glass windows. She hadn't shed a single tear. Not one. While Father Michael spoke about Roland's dreams of clean energy, Meera's perfectly manicured fingers scrolled through her phone. Roland often spoke of his father, Father Michael continued, how Talbot Quinn inspired his love of engineering, of building things that mattered. James Warren turned to look at me, Roland's business partner, the man who'd helped secure $40 million in funding for their startup. He gave me a small nod, his eyes red-rimmed. I nodded back, surprised. Roland had talked about me to his colleagues. I'd always thought he saw me as just his poor father, who drove a beat-up pickup truck. The sound of heels clicking on marble made me turn. Meera was walking out during the eulogy. She pushed past an elderly woman in the aisle, her black Gucci dress swishing as she headed for the exit. The scent of her expensive perfume lingered, something French and overpowering that mixed unpleasantly with the funeral flowers. I watched her disappear through the cathedral doors. The gray San Francisco sky was visible beyond, matching the mood inside. But Meera wasn't grieving. She was... what? Bored? Impatient? Father Michael's voice brought me back. Let us remember Roland, not just for what he achieved, but for the love he gave and received. His legacy lives on in the hearts of those who knew him. Roland's photo smiled down at us from beside the casket, that warm, confident grin that had lit up rooms since he was a boy. The same smile he'd worn when he'd introduced me to Meera last year. "Dad, this is the woman I'm going to marry." He'd been so happy, so sure of his future. The service was ending. Guests began filing out slowly, speaking in hushed tones. Some approached me with condolences. A woman from Roland's Stanford class squeezed my hand. "He was so proud of you, Mr. Quinn. Always talked about his engineer father." Engineer father, if only they knew the whole story. James Warren waited as the crowd thinned. "Mr. Quinn, could I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course." "Roland always said you were his inspiration, the way you taught him to build things, to solve problems. He credited you for everything he became." James's voice cracked slightly. "I wanted you to know that. He loved you deeply." My throat tightened. "Thank you, James. That means everything." The cathedral was nearly empty now. I needed to find Meera, to thank her for being with Roland in his final months. Whatever our differences, she'd been his wife. She'd made him happy, at least for a while. I walked toward the exit, my worn dress shoes echoing in the vast space. Through the open doors, I could see guests gathering in the parking lot, some still talking quietly. The California afternoon was cool, typical March weather in San Francisco. Meera stood beside a white Mercedes-Benz, putting out a cigarette, her third one since the service started. I'd been counting. I crossed the parking lot slowly, my legs heavy with grief and exhaustion. The asphalt felt unsteady under my feet. Other guests were scattered around their cars, still processing the service, some embracing before they left. The sound of quiet conversations drifted through the cool air. Meera dropped her cigarette and ground it under her designer heel. She was fishing for her car keys in a small black purse that probably cost more than I made in a month. The Mercedes gleamed white in the overcast light, pristine and expensive among the modest sedans and SUVs of Roland's friends. I rehearsed words in my head as I approached. Something kind. Something that acknowledged her loss too. She'd been Roland's wife, the woman he'd chosen to spend his life with. Despite everything I'd observed today, she deserved my gratitude. Meera. I stopped a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her. Thank you for being there for Roland. I know he loved you so much, and I'm grateful he had you in his final months. She looked up from her purse, and for a moment I saw something flash across her face. Not grief, not even annoyance, something colder. Listen to me, very carefully, old man. Her voice cut through the parking lot like a blade. Several nearby guests turned their heads. You won't get a single penny of those $40 million, not 1 cent. Roland left everything to me, and I don't owe you anything. The words hit me like a physical blow. I took a step back, blinking. I wasn't asking for money. I just wanted to thank you. Thank me? She laughed, a harsh sound that made more people turn to stare. For what? Putting up with your pathetic son's obsession with saving the world? For pretending to care about his stupid environmental projects? My hands began to tremble. Around us, conversations had stopped. James Warren was staring from across the parking lot, his mouth slightly open. An elderly couple I didn't recognize looked shocked, the woman covering her mouth with her hand. Don't look at me like that, Meera continued, her voice rising. You think I don't know what this is about? You're just another pauper hoping for a handout. Well, you can forget it. Get in your beat-up pickup truck and drive back to whatever hole you crawled out of. The parking lot had gone completely silent except for the distant sound of traffic on Fillmore Street. 20 or 30 people were watching now, witnessing this moment. On the day we buried my son, this woman, his wife, was calling me a pauper and telling me to crawl back into a hole. Meera, please. My voice came out as barely a whisper. Today we buried Roland, can't we? Today I became a very rich widow, she snapped, jangling her car keys. And you became nothing, just like you always were. She clicked the Mercedes remote. The car chirped and flashed its lights. Without another word, she slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and reversed out of the parking space so quickly that gravel scattered across the asphalt. I stood there as the white Mercedes disappeared down the hill toward downtown San Francisco. The other guests were avoiding my eyes now, some hurrying to their own cars, others pretending to be absorbed in their phones. The humiliation burned through me, hot and acidic. James Warren started walking toward me, his face full of concern. But I couldn't bear his sympathy right now. I couldn't bear anyone's sympathy. I turned and walked to my Ford F-150, parked in the far corner of the lot, where I'd hoped it wouldn't embarrass Roland. My hands shook as I started the truck. The engine coughed once before catching, the familiar rumble that had carried me through 15 years of ownership. I sat for a moment in the driver's seat, gripping the worn steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Pauper. She'd called me a pauper in front of everyone who loved my son. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the Golden Gate Bridge. The late afternoon fog was rolling in from the Pacific, wrapping around the bridge towers like ghostly fingers. Perfect weather for this kind of devastation. The radio played softly, some classical station Roland had programmed for me months ago. Traffic was light for a Saturday. I drove slowly, letting other cars pass. My mind kept replaying Meera's words, but they triggered something deeper. Memories I'd buried for years. Roland at 8 years old, building model rockets in our garage. Daddy, will you help me make this one go higher? His small hands covered in glue, eyes bright with possibility. Even then, he'd wanted to reach for the stars. The bridge stretched before me, its Art Deco towers disappearing into the fog. I'd driven this route thousands of times, but today it felt like crossing into another world. A world where my son was gone and his wife thought I was worthless. I pulled over at the Vista Point, needing a moment to collect myself. The bay spread out below, gray and endless. A few tourists with cameras wandered the overlook, but I stayed in my truck. More memories flooded back. The day I'd walked away from NASA. Roland was 10 and the choice had been simple. Stay in Houston and advance my career, or move to California where Roland could attend better schools. His mother had died 3 years earlier, and it was just the two of us. "Mr. Quinn, you're giving up a brilliant future," the career counselor had said. "These rocket engine designs could revolutionize space travel." But Roland's education mattered more than my ambitions. Stanford was expensive, even with scholarships. He'd needed stability, opportunities, a father who was present. So I'd taken a quiet engineering job in Oakland and watched him flourish. The fog was thickening. I started the truck and continued across the bridge toward home. My neighborhood in Oakland was modest, small houses built in the 1950s, working-class families, nothing like the Pacific Heights mansion where Roland and Meera had lived. I parked in my narrow driveway and sat for another moment. The house looked smaller than usual, one story, 2 bedrooms, a garage I'd converted into a workshop years ago. The lawn needed mowing. Inside, Roland's presence was everywhere. Photos from his Stanford graduation, articles about his startup, the drawing he'd made at 16 of our family, just the 2 of us, standing beside a rocket ship he'd labeled Quinn Engineering. "Dad, you're my hero, even if we don't have much money," he'd said that day. I walked to my study, a small room lined with engineering textbooks and technical manuals. Most people who visited thought it was just the workspace of a retired engineer. They didn't know about the filing cabinet in the corner. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a manila folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents that would have made Meera's jaw drop. Patents for rocket engine designs, filed between 1995 and 2005, all bearing my name, all generating substantial royalties for 2 decades. I spread the papers across my desk with trembling fingers. Propulsion systems that were now standard in commercial satellites. Fuel efficiency designs that had saved aerospace companies millions. My work, my innovations, still being used today. Beneath the patents were bank statements I'd hidden even from Roland. $12 million across various accounts. Money I'd never touched, never mentioned, never used for anything but the most basic necessities. I'd wanted Roland to value hard work over easy wealth. I'd wanted him to build his own success without the burden of inherited money. Maybe I'd been wrong. I picked up his graduation photo from my desk. He was grinning in his cap and gown, one arm around me, both of us squinting in the bright California sun. He'd been so proud that day, talking about his plans to change the world through technology. "You taught me everything about engineering, Dad," he'd said. "Someday I'll make you proud." But he'd never known the truth, never known that his father had already changed the world, had already made millions, had already earned respect in circles Roland could only dream of. I'd let him think I was just a simple engineer driving an old pickup truck, living paycheck to paycheck. Meera had called me a pauper, but I could have bought 10 of her precious Mercedes without denting my savings. The irony was bitter as medicine. I set down the photo and looked around my modest study. Had I made the right choice, hiding my success? Had Roland died thinking his father was a failure, never knowing about the sacrifices I'd made or the achievements I'd earned? The question hung in the air like the fog outside my window, heavy and gray and impossible to answer. 3 days had passed since the funeral. 3 days of silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on Telegraph Avenue. I'd been moving through my house like a ghost, unable to settle anywhere for long. The morning of March 18th found me in the kitchen, making coffee in Roland's old NASA mug, the one he'd given me for my birthday years ago. "Because you're my rocket scientist dad," he'd said, grinning. Now it felt heavy in my hands, too precious to use but too meaningful to put away. I sat at the small kitchen table, staring at Roland's empty chair. The newspaper still lay in its plastic wrapper on the front porch. Bills accumulated unopened on the counter. Normal life felt impossible when my son was gone. The phone rang at exactly 10:15. I almost didn't answer. Few people called anymore, and I wasn't ready for condolences or well-meaning neighbors asking if I needed anything. But something made me pick up the receiver. "Mr. Quinn, this is Wilfred Byron. I was your son's attorney." I nearly dropped the phone. "Attorney? Roland never mentioned Mr. Talbert Quinn, correct? Roland's father?" The voice was professional, measured. "I'm calling because your son left a will. I need to schedule a reading." "A will?" My reading glasses slipped down my nose as I fumbled for a pen. But he was so young. Did he anticipate something? "Successful entrepreneurs often prepare such documents, Mr. Quinn. It's quite common in the tech industry. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 2 o'clock? I wrote the address with shaking hands, my penmanship getting steadier as the shock wore off. Of course. Mr. Byrne, does Meera know about this? A pause. I'm contacting all relevant parties according to the document's specifications. Montgomery Street, Suite 1847. You'll need identification. After hanging up, I sat staring at the paper where I'd written the appointment details. Roland had made a will. At 35, he'd thought about death, about what would happen to everything he'd built. The coffee in his mug had gone cold. I needed to tell someone. Opening my address book, I found Frank Morrison's number. Frank had worked with me at NASA 30 years ago, before I'd moved to California for Roland's education. He was the only person who knew both versions of my life. Frank, it's Tal Quinn. Tal, how are you holding up? I was sorry to hear about Roland. That's why I'm calling. His lawyer just contacted me. Apparently Roland left a will. Really? That's unexpected for someone his age. But then again, Roland was always thoughtful, even as a kid when you'd bring him to the lab. Frank's words brought back memories of 8-year-old Roland wandering the NASA facilities, asking engineers endless questions about rocket propulsion. Even then, he'd been fascinated by how things worked, how they could be improved. I don't know what to expect, Frank. Meera made it clear at the funeral that she considers everything hers. Whatever happens, Tal, you raised a good man. That's worth more than any inheritance. I hung up feeling marginally better. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight, I just had to get through the waiting. I looked at the appointment paper again. A spark of something. Hope, maybe, flickered where despair had lived for 3 days. The next morning, I stood in my bedroom closet, looking at my limited options. The black suit from the funeral hung beside 2 other suits I'd accumulated over the decades. Neither was particularly stylish, but both were clean and pressed. I chose the navy blue one. It seemed more appropriate for a business meeting than morning clothes. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man trying to maintain dignity despite circumstances. Gray hair combed carefully, face showing the exhaustion of grief, but determined. Roland deserved this respect, whatever was about to happen. The Ford F-150 started with its usual cough. I'd checked the gas tank twice, reviewed the written directions, even though I knew downtown San Francisco well enough. Nervous habits, but they helped. The digital clock on the dashboard read 1 p.m. as I pulled out of my driveway. The drive across the Bay Bridge was different this time. Instead of the crushing grief I'd felt leaving the funeral, anticipation hummed in my chest. What had Roland written? What had he wanted to happen after he was gone? Traffic was light for a Tuesday afternoon. I found myself remembering other trips to the city with Roland, taking him to see the Golden Gate Bridge when he was 8, driving him to Stanford orientation when he was 18. Each memory carried its own weight of pride and loss. I stopped at a small cafe near the financial district. My hands were shaking slightly, whether from nerves or too much coffee, I couldn't tell. The place buzzed with young professionals in expensive suits, tablets, and phones scattered across every table. Everyone moved with purpose, with places to be and deals to make. I felt out of place, but not unwelcome. The barista was kind to the older man, ordering a simple black coffee. No fancy names or complicated preparations. I sat by the window, watching the crowd, trying to calm my nerves. Whatever happens, I whispered to myself, you'll accept his decision with dignity. But what if Roland really had left everything to Meera? What if his father had been nothing more than an obligation to him? What if those childhood moments of, "Dad, you're my hero," had faded as he'd built his successful adult life? No. I pushed those thoughts away. Roland had loved me. I'd seen it in his eyes at our last dinner together, heard it in his voice when he'd called just a week before the accident. Dad, I'm grateful for everything you sacrificed for me. The financial district's towers gleamed in the afternoon sun as I walked toward Montgomery Street. Glass and steel reaching toward the sky, monuments to ambition and success. Roland had belonged in this world of innovation and possibility. My old Ford looked shabby, parked between a Tesla and a BMW. But it had gotten me here safely, just as it had carried me through 15 years of dependable service. Like me, it might not be impressive, but it was reliable. I squared my shoulders and walked toward the office building, carrying whatever hope I had left toward an uncertain future. The revolving door led into a marble lobby that made my footsteps echo. And there, standing by the elevators in a perfect black Chanel suit, was Meera. She looked like she owned the place. Everything about her radiated expensive confidence. The way she stood, the casual way she checked her diamond-encrusted Cartier watch, the subtle but unmistakable scent of French perfume that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Meera saw me approaching and deliberately turned away, examining her perfectly manicured nails as if they required urgent attention. The dismissal was calculated, designed to make me feel small before I even spoke. I approached the elevator bank slowly, my polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The lobby buzzed with conversations between men and women in $1,000 suits discussing mergers and acquisitions. I felt like an intruder in their world, but I belonged here today. Roland had made sure of that. "Hello, Meera." She turned slowly, as if my voice was an interruption she could barely tolerate. "Tal, you shouldn't have come. This is just a formality. Everything belongs to me as his wife. Meera, let's wait to hear what the lawyer says." Her laugh was sharp, cutting through the lobby's professional murmur. "Don't be naive, old man. I was his wife. I was the one he loved. You were just the father who drove a pickup truck." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. We stepped inside together, the mirrored walls reflecting our contrasting appearances. She looked like money and power. I looked like exactly what I was, a grieving father in his best attempt at respectability. "Roland loved me," she continued as the doors closed, trapping us in the small space. "Not you. You were an obligation he felt sorry for. He loved us both in different ways. Keep telling yourself that." Her voice was honey over poison. "You'll need the comfort when you walk away empty-handed. Did you really think he'd leave anything to a man who never gave him anything but disappointment?" The elevator climbed steadily toward the 18th floor. I watched the numbers light up. 10, 11, 12. Each floor carrying us closer to the truth. I gave him everything I had. "Your everything wasn't much, was it?" She adjusted her purse strap, a gesture of casual cruelty. "A modest house in Oakland, an old truck, dreams of rockets that never flew. Roland deserved better than that kind of poverty." The elevator shuddered slightly as it slowed. Floor 15, 16, 17. My reflection in the mirrors showed a man trying to maintain dignity while being systematically destroyed by someone who should have been grieving alongside me. "He was everything to me," I said quietly. "And yet you were nothing to him. Not really, not when it mattered." Floor 18. The elevator stopped with a gentle bump. Meera smoothed her suit and checked her reflection one final time. "This will be over quickly, Tal. Then you can go back to your little house and remember what it felt like to hope for 5 minutes." The doors opened onto a carpeted hallway lined with law firm nameplates. Meera stepped out first, her heels clicking confidently on the polished floor. I followed, carrying whatever dignity I had left, toward whatever truth waited in Wilfred Burns' office. The law office occupied the entire 34th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of San Francisco Bay. Mahogany furniture dominated the space, from the massive desk, where Wilfred Burns sat, to the conference table, where he gestured for us to sit. "Please, make yourselves comfortable." Byrne was exactly what I had expected. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit that fit perfectly. The kind of man Roland would have trusted with important documents. Meera chose the chair closest to the head of the table, positioning herself like she was already in charge of the meeting. I took the seat Byrne indicated, feeling the leather creak under my weight. Everything in this office probably cost more than I made in 6 months. The will lay on the table between us, official seals visible on cream-colored paper. 20 pages, maybe more. Roland had been thorough about whatever he'd decided. "This is the last will and testament of Roland Quinn, executed February 12th, 2025. Burns' voice carried the formal weight of legal proceedings. Witnessed by 2 independent parties and properly notarized according to California state law. February 12th. Roland had written this will just a month before the accident. Had he sensed something, or was this simply what successful entrepreneurs did, plan for every contingency? Meera sat straighter in her chair, her designer purse placed precisely beside her feet. She radiated confidence, like someone who knew exactly what was coming. Regarding my business interests in Quinn Environmental Technologies, Byrne continued, adjusting his reading glasses. I bequeath all shares and operational control to my business partners, James Warren and Patricia Chen, for continuation of our environmental mission. I felt a surge of pride. Even in death, Roland was thinking about changing the world. The business he'd built would continue without him, carrying forward his dreams of clean technology. Meera shifted slightly but didn't seem concerned. She'd never shown much interest in Roland's environmental work anyway. What mattered to her was money, not mission statements. The Presidio Heights residence at 2847 Divisadero Street. I leave to the Bay Area Children's Foundation, with lifetime residence rights granted to my wife, Meera Lawrence Quinn. Now her posture changed. What exactly does residence rights mean? Her voice carried the first hint of uncertainty I'd heard since we'd entered the office. The house belongs to me, doesn't it? Byrne looked up from the document, his expression patient but professional. You may continue living there for life, Mrs. Quinn, but ownership transfers to the charity. The foundation will maintain the property and handle all expenses. Meera's manicured fingers drummed once against the table's polished surface. This wasn't what she'd expected. Not ownership, just occupancy. Her confidence wavered for the first time since I'd known her. The bay stretched beyond the windows, gray water under gray sky. Somewhere out there, cargo ships were bringing goods from around the world, life continuing while we sat in this expensive office, parsing the final wishes of my dead son. Byrne turned the page, his movements deliberate and professional. Whatever came next, I could see from his expression that it was important. Meera straightened in her chair, clearly expecting the financial section to restore her confidence. I braced myself for whatever disappointment Roland had left me. Byrne paused, looking down at the document with the gravity of someone about to change everything. The silence stretched across the office, broken only by the distant hum of San Francisco traffic 34 floors below. Meera leaned forward slightly, her Cartier watch catching the afternoon light. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. The validation of her assumption that wealth followed marriage, that Roland's love translated to financial security. Regarding my financial assets, Byrne began, his voice steady and formal, my bank accounts totaling $30 million, I bequeath in their entirety to my father, Talbert Quinn. The words hit the room like a physical force. Meera's chair scraped violently against the floor as she shot to her feet. What? That's impossible. I'm his wife. Everything should come to me. But I couldn't focus on her outburst. $30 million. Roland had left me $30 million. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, and I gripped the arms of the leather chair to steady myself. He knew. Somehow, my son had known about my sacrifices, my hidden success, my choice to live modestly while securing his future. The tears came without warning, spilling onto the mahogany table. There must be a mistake. Meera was pacing now, her perfectly styled composure completely shattered. Roland loved me. He wouldn't do this to me. Byrne continued reading with professional calm, despite the chaos erupting around him. I also leave to my father my personal library and my private journal, which contains my thoughts about his incredible sacrifices for my education and future. Roland's journal, written proof that he'd understood what I'd given up for him, the validation I'd never thought to hope for, coming from beyond the grave. This is fraud. I demand to see the original document. Meera's voice had risen to near shouting levels. Her Chanel suit was wrinkled now from her frantic movements, her perfectly arranged hair beginning to come undone. Through my tears, I watched this woman who had called me a pauper just days ago. She was learning that the pathetic old man she'd dismissed was inheriting more money than she'd ever dreamed of. He knew, I whispered, my voice breaking. Roland knew what I'd done for him. Byrne looked up from the document, his expression sympathetic but professional. Your son specifically mentioned your career sacrifices in his personal notes, Mr. Quinn. He was deeply grateful for your decision to prioritize his education over your own advancement. Meera slammed her hand against the conference table. I don't believe this. We need to contest this will. There has to be grounds for... Mrs. Quinn, Byrne interrupted gently but firmly. The document is legally impeccable. 2 independent witnesses, proper notarization, and your husband was of sound mind when he executed it. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the office. In those shadows, I could almost see Roland as a boy, building rockets in our garage, dreaming of changing the world. He'd achieved that dream, and somehow, he'd remembered who had helped him reach for the stars. Meera stood frozen beside her chair, staring at the will as if she could change its contents through sheer force of will. The silence that followed was deafening. Meera grabbed the edge of the conference table, her knuckles white against the dark wood. "Show me the signatures. Show me the witnesses. There has to be something wrong with this document." Byrne opened a file folder and spread several pages across the table. "Here are the witness signatures. Dr. Patricia Chen and James Warren, your husband's business partners. Here's the notary seal from Jennifer Martinez, certified by the state of California. Every legal requirement has been met." She studied the documents frantically, searching for any flaw, any technicality that might restore her expected inheritance. But the papers were pristine, official, unassailable. "Roland couldn't have meant this," she said, her voice beginning to crack. "We were married. We had plans. He promised me security." Despite everything she'd put me through, I felt a flicker of sympathy. "Meera, I don't need all of this money. We could work something out, share it somehow." "I don't want your charity." The words exploded from her with vicious force. "This is theft. You manipulated him somehow, poisoned his mind against me." Byrne's patience was wearing thin. "Mrs. Quinn, I must ask you to lower your voice. The will clearly states your husband's reasoning for each decision. There was no manipulation involved." She whirled on me, her eyes blazing with desperate fury. "You think you've won something? You think this is over? You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Meera, please." "No." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You sit there looking so humble, so innocent. But you've stolen my future, my security, everything Roland promised me. You'll regret this betrayal." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Byrne straightened in his chair, his professional demeanor hardening. "Mrs. Quinn, if you cannot conduct yourself appropriately, I'll have to ask security to escort you from the building." She grabbed her expensive purse, clutching it like a weapon. "This isn't finished. I won't let some pathetic old man steal what's rightfully mine. You have resources now, Talbert, but so do I. And I know things about Roland that could destroy his precious reputation." "What are you talking about?" I asked quietly. Her smile was cold, calculating. "Let's just say your perfect son wasn't quite as perfect as everyone thinks. Keep that 30 million close, old man. You're going to need every penny to protect his memory." Without another word, she strode to the office door and yanked it open. The sound of her heels clicked rapidly down the hallway, growing fainter until the elevator doors closed behind her with a distant chime. Byrne and I sat in the sudden silence, the threat of her words echoing in the luxurious office. Outside, San Francisco continued its busy day, unaware that a war had just been declared on the 34th floor of a downtown office building. "Mr. Quinn," Byrne said carefully, "your daughter-in-law seems upset. Perhaps we should discuss security measures for the assets." I stared at the will still spread across the table, Roland's final gift to me, and wondered what secrets Meera thought she possessed. Whatever they were, I had the feeling this inheritance would come with a price I hadn't yet begun to calculate. The office felt very quiet after her explosive departure. Too quiet. The office felt very quiet after her explosive departure. Too quiet. 3 days had passed since the will reading. I'd spent them in my armchair, reading Roland's diary from cover to cover, page after page of his thoughts, dreams, and, most importantly, his gratitude for what he called my invisible sacrifices. One entry from last December made my chest tight. Dad sold his rockets to buy me wings. He gave up NASA's stars so I could reach for my own. I'll never be able to repay what he sacrificed, but I can honor it. The lamp cast a warm circle of light in my living room when the phone rang at 9:30. I almost didn't answer. Few people called this late, and I wasn't ready for condolences or questions about the inheritance, but something made me reach for the receiver. "Tal?" The voice was broken, barely recognizable. "It's Meera." I sat up straighter. This wasn't the confident, cruel woman from the law office. This voice was raw, shaking, desperate. I was wrong, completely, horribly wrong. What I said at the funeral, at the lawyer's office, please forgive me. I wasn't thinking clearly. "Meera, what's happened?" A sob escaped her. "Everything's falling apart. I haven't worked in over a year. I lived entirely on Roland's money, his credit cards, his accounts. Without them, the silence stretched between us. I could hear traffic in the background, suggesting she was calling from somewhere public, maybe a payphone or cheap hotel. I have nothing left, Tal. My rent is 3 months behind. The credit card companies are calling constantly. I'm about to be evicted from the house. Your house. I mean, Roland's house. Despite everything she'd put me through, I felt a stab of sympathy. This was a young woman facing genuine financial ruin. I'm sorry you're struggling, Meera. Would you consider sharing even a small portion? Just 1 million? 2? I'll sign papers, pay interest, whatever you want. I'll work for the rest of my life to repay you. Her desperation was palpable, but Roland's words from the diary were fresh in my mind. He'd been careful, deliberate about his decisions. He'd wanted to honor my sacrifices while ensuring his wealth served his values. This was your husband's will, Meera. I cannot violate his clear wishes. But he couldn't have anticipated this. He didn't know I'd be destitute. Roland was thoughtful about everything. If he'd wanted you to have more, he would have provided it. Her voice hardened. You're sitting on $42 million and you won't help the woman who made your son happy? 30 million, I corrected gently. And yes, Roland made his decision carefully. I must respect it. The line went quiet except for her breathing. When she spoke again, the desperation had curdled into something darker. Fine. Enjoy your windfall, Tal. But remember, I know things about Roland that could change how people remember him. Keep that money close. You might need every penny. The dial tone hummed in my ear. I set down the phone and returned to Roland's diary, but his words about integrity and doing what's right felt heavier now. Outside, Oakland was settling into its quiet evening rhythm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Meera's threats were just beginning. Morning coffee in hand, I walked toward my garage, planning to visit Roland's grave. The March air was crisp, typical Bay Area spring weather, and I felt more at peace than I had since his death. Reading his diary had given me something precious, proof that he'd understood and appreciated everything I'd sacrificed for him. Then I saw my truck. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering on the concrete driveway. All 4 tires were flat. Not flat. Destroyed. Deep, deliberate cuts slashed through the rubber, leaving my Ford F-150 sitting helplessly on its rims. I approached slowly, my heart pounding. This wasn't random vandalism. The cuts were too precise, too purposeful. Someone had taken their time, making sure I couldn't drive anywhere. A piece of paper fluttered under the windshield wiper. I pulled it free with trembling hands and recognized Meera's elegant handwriting immediately. Give me what's mine, or it gets worse. Don't think this is finished. The words hit me like a physical blow. She'd driven here in the middle of the night, crept around my house, destroyed my property. The woman who'd been Roland's wife had become a criminal. I pulled out my phone and called 911. My voice was steady despite the anger building in my chest. I need to report vandalism and criminal threats. Officer Rodriguez arrived within 20 minutes, a professional woman in her 40s who took detailed notes as I explained the situation. I showed her the tire damage, the threatening note, and described our recent conflicts. Any witnesses to previous threats? She asked. Unfortunately, yes. The confrontation at the lawyer's office had multiple witnesses, and there are security cameras in the building. That's helpful. Vandalism and criminal threats are serious charges, Mr. Quinn. Do you want to press full charges? I looked at my destroyed truck, then at the note in her evidence bag. Meera had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. This wasn't grief or desperation anymore. It was deliberate criminal behavior. Yes, I do. Rodriguez spent another hour documenting everything, taking photographs, dusting for fingerprints on the note. A tow truck arrived to collect my damaged vehicle. Neighbors had gathered on their porches, watching the unusual excitement in our quiet Oakland neighborhood. After the police left, I stood alone in my driveway, staring at the oil stains where my truck had been. Meera's desperation had driven her to destroy herself completely. By committing these crimes, she'd violated the terms of her residence rights. She would lose everything now, not because of my choice, but because of her own actions. I walked back into my house, carrying the weight of what she'd forced me to do. Roland's diary still lay open on my reading table, his words about integrity and moral courage seeming prophetic now. Sometimes justice comes not through revenge, but through simply letting people reveal who they truly are. 2 months later, I sat in Judge Hartwell's courtroom, watching Meera plead guilty to vandalism and criminal threats. She'd lost weight, her expensive clothes replaced by a simple black dress that had seen better days. Her lawyer was court-appointed. She couldn't afford private representation anymore. "Mr. Quinn," Judge Hartwell asked, "please confirm that the defendant threatened you and damaged your property." "Yes, Your Honor, but I feel sadness rather than anger about what happened." The judge sentenced Meera to community service, restitution for my truck repairs, and loss of her residence rights due to criminal conviction against a family member. She would have to leave the Presidio Heights house within 30 days. I didn't feel triumphant watching her fate sealed. Justice through proper channels, yes, but no satisfaction in another person's downfall. Outside the courthouse, a journalist from the Chronicle approached me. "Mr. Quinn, what will you do with your inheritance?" Roland dreamed of helping young engineers from disadvantaged backgrounds. "I'm establishing the Roland Quinn Environmental Engineering Scholarship at Stanford. That's how his memory should live on." The first scholarship recipients were announced in May. 5 brilliant students who reminded me of Roland at 18, full of dreams about changing the world through technology. The foundation lawyer assured me the endowment would support students for generations. I'd also made another change. Using a small portion of the inheritance, I bought a modest cottage in Pacifica, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, not because I needed luxury, but because I wanted the sound of waves instead of city traffic. The house was simple: 2 bedrooms, a study for Roland's books, and a deck where I could read his diary while watching the sunset. One evening in late May, I saw a car packed with belongings driving away from the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Even from a distance, I recognized Meera's profile. She was heading south toward Los Angeles, where she'd found work as a retail manager. Not the life she'd planned, but an honest one she'd have to build herself. I returned to my cottage and opened Roland's diary to the final entry, written just days before his death. "Dad taught me that real wealth isn't money. It's having people who love you unconditionally. I've been rich my whole life because of him. I hope someday I can be half the father he's been to me." The waves crashed against the Pacifica shore as I closed the diary. Roland's inheritance had given me financial security I'd never expected, but his words had given me something more valuable: the knowledge that my sacrifices had mattered, that love had been received and understood. Meera had been wrong about one thing. The real treasure wasn't the money. It was the relationship I'd built with my son, preserved forever in his handwritten gratitude. The ocean stretched endless before me, and for the first time since Roland's death, I felt truly at peace. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.